Scary dude in Kentucky woods. This happened about a year ago on a camping trip to Kentucky in the winter. My girlfriend at the time and 3 of my buddies spent the long weekend doing some hiking and camping. We drove in on a Friday night around midnight and set up camp. There was almost no one else at this campsite besides a young couple a bit down the road from us and an older man down the road the other way. We unloaded the cars in the dark, got the headlamps out, and started setting up the tents. All of a sudden, my girlfriend noticed that there was an extra person amongst us. It was the young woman from the couple at the campsite down the road. She looked really messed up. Her eyes were glazed, and her skin looked like she had been picking at it constantly. She introduced herself and spoke in a sort of monotonous way. Overall, she seemed nice, but it's her boyfriend or husband who really creeped us out. We noticed after talking with her for a bit that he was standing near our campsite at the edge of the woods, just staring at us. Eventually, he went back to their campsite, but then got his car and pulled right up to us with his high beams on. As you can imagine, getting blasted by high beams at midnight in the middle of the woods really impairs your ability to see. His girlfriend said she had to go and got in the car with him. At this point, we were all weirded out, but not freaked out yet. It was later in the night when things got scary. I was in the tent with my girlfriend when I started to hear a domestic argument from the couple down the road. It soon escalated to full screaming. Then I heard the sound of glass break. At this point, my girlfriend and I are sitting up and deciding if we should do something about it. I hear someone get into the car. The car then peels out of the campsite and races down the dirt road past our campsite, kicking up dirt and gravel against the side of our tent. The guy had apparently left his girlfriend in the campsite because we could hear her sobbing. My girlfriend and I start getting dressed so we can check out the situation, but the car comes peeling back up the road and parks back at the campsite. Loud panic shouting ensues, and we hear 2 clear pops that sound exactly like gunshots. I remember the feeling of the blood draining from my face. My girlfriend and I are basically frozen in our tent, listening. Finally, to our great relief, we hear them both start arguing again. The argument settles down by about 4 in the morning and we all fall asleep. When we woke up, they were gone. I asked my buddies if they heard what happened, and they said it kept them up as well. We made breakfast and started packing up when the older man from the trailer walked over and started chatting with us. He seemed surprised that my girlfriend was with me and said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have brought her. It's not safe for a woman here." Needless to say, we were officially creeped, and we found a new area of the state park to stay. We found a lovely lakeside campsite the next night and enjoyed the rest of the trip, but we were certainly jarred by the encounters. Don't ask for directions on lonely roads. In the summer of 2013, my friends and I went out to the lake for the August long weekend. We heard of a party that night about a half hour away from where we were staying, and decided to meet up with some other friends who were attending. Mostly everyone was drunk at this point. It was already 10 p.m. at night, and since I had only a couple of drinks through the day, I decided to drive one of the vehicles. Since there were about 8 or so of us, we had to take 2 vehicles. We loaded up the cars with tents and booze, since we planned on staying the night, and off we went. The drive started out pretty normal. We didn't exactly know where we were going, so we relied on cell phone GPS, which didn't work well since we were in cabin country. The vehicle that I was driving left about 15 minutes before the other one because they were playing some frisbee game where you had to knock off a bottle on a post, and I guess they had money on the game or something. I've been going out to the lake for my entire life at this point, but the fact that I really just had a crappy GPS connection, coupled with headlights that were really dim, made for a challenging experience. We knew we weren't far from the party, but it was evident that we were kind of lost. One thing about the area that we were in is that there are a lot of people around. There are stretches of road that at night you won't be able to see another car ever, but there are always plenty of cabins nearby. The population of this area between the winter and summer changes, roughly 5,000 to 50,000. After a good amount of driving, we see a car ahead with its hazards on. We decide to ask whoever was there for directions. Not a good idea. We pull up beside the car and I look over and see a guy who looked not to be much older than us, but then again it was hard to tell. He appeared mid-20s with wide frame glasses and shoulder-length hair under a mesh cap. He was just staring ahead, looking into the distance. "Hey buddy, you don't happen to know where Spruce Bend is, do you? We're going to a party and got lost." No response. The guy just kept looking ahead. "You alright?" I asked. Yeah. Just make your next left and I'll be right after that." "Thanks, much appreciated." So we keep going and notice that this guy has turned his hazards off and is following a distance behind us. Bit strange, but we didn't think much of it at the time. We made the left that he suggested onto a really rough and bumpy gravel road and took that for roughly 3 minutes. The road was really shitty, but I could see the glow of headlights behind me. The first right was a dirt road unmarked that didn't appear to go very far. We slowed down and debated turning down this road, and looking back, I'm glad we didn't. The guy was still following us and we decided to peel out of there. He followed us right on our tail the whole way back down that road. The road had no cabins, no identifying features, and no turns until we got to the end. Some of the guys in the car wanted to pull over. There was 5 of us and 1 of him, and they figured we could take him, but the guys seemed nuts and I wasn't about to let some lunatic with a gun shoot all of us. I kept driving and driving, hung a right at the end of the road, which led out to the highway. He stopped following us at that point, and as we took off, the image of his car sitting at the end of that road, not moving as we speed off into the distance, is embedded inside my mind. We called the other car, and they seemed to have better GPS, so they told us where to go. The party was great, but I think that night still sits with us. I sure don't want to come across a car with its hazards on a lonely, unmarked road in the heat of the summer again. Boyfriend's little brother. This happened about 13 years ago, during my freshman year of college. I had made a new best friend from my dorm during the first 6 months. Her hometown was only an hour away from our college and had a really great winter festival every February. I went home with BFF for a long weekend to attend the winter festival and stay at her family's home. At the time, her dad was very absent and stayed with his girlfriend most of the time, leaving his son, who was about 14 then, home alone with us for the weekend. My BFF's little brother seemed innocent enough. We hung out with him during the day the first Friday we arrived at her house, and then left him home alone when we went to the festival, as we were partying pretty hard and he was too young to go with us. We came back to her home relatively early that night, around 11 p.m. or so, and her little brother was still awake. I changed into my nightgown and got ready for bed while he was still awake. My BFF told me I could sleep in her bedroom, and she was going to crash on the couch so she could watch TV as she fell asleep. I left her bedroom door open and nightlight on, since it was a strange house and I didn't want to stumble around in the dark if I had to go to the bathroom. I slept peacefully until about 3 a.m. when something woke me up. I woke up slowly, looking around, confused. I didn't have my glasses on and couldn't see much. As I laid in bed groggily trying to figure out why I had woken up, I felt something touch my butt from under the covers. This scared the crap out of me. I shot up in bed with a gasp and saw the shape of a person holding up my covers around my waist with a flashlight in his hand. I freaked out. and with pure instinct began punching this person with both hands. I just kept swinging and hit him in the face probably a dozen times until he dropped the flashlight and fled the room. As soon as he was gone, I lunged towards the door and closed it and locked it, then turned on the overhead light and grabbed my glasses so I could see. I sat there for a moment. As my brain processed what had just happened, I realized it was my BFF's little brother creeping on me and looking at my body under the covers. After a few minutes of calming down, I grabbed a pillow and blanket off the bed and went out into the living room and woke my BFF, telling her what happened and explaining that I was gonna sleep on the floor. She seemed kinda confused but said okay, and we went back to bed. Not that I slept much. I kept worrying creepy little brother might be coming back to molest me more. The next day, I discussed it with my BFF and she claimed her little brother was looking for CDs to listen under her bed. I tried to explain that that was not the case, but she did tell some mutual friends at college later on that she was pissed at me for basically beating the crap out of her brother for no reason. I stayed at her house another 2 days after the incident, sleeping on the floor in the living room next to her. Her little brother did not show his face again all weekend. He hid in his room, ashamed. I remain friends with this girl to this day. She lives about 4 hours away from me now, and I see her a few times a year. And not until these past few years could her little brother, who is now in his late 20s and is married, manage to look me in the eye without being completely embarrassed. I can tell that every time he sees me, he thinks of the incident and feels ashamed. Anyways, I know this is not nearly as creepy as a lot of the other stories on the subreddit, but I thought I would share. I don't really blame her little brother anymore. He was a prepubescent horny little preteen, and I get that he made a big mistake and he knows it. I'll be missing you tonight. I've only told this story to my boyfriend, and he suggested writing about it might help. It's really hard for me to even think about, or even harder to talk about it. I'm hoping putting my story out there instead of holding it in will help me move on. This occurred when I was 14. I'm 21 now. It was October, and my family was at a campground in Vermont for the long weekend. My family is Native American, and it was the second year in a row that we had gone to this particular powwow, Native gathering. This one is open for anybody to come, Native or not, during the day. We brought a camper because it was cold that time of year, especially with the wind coming off the lake. Anyways, it was the first day of the powwow, and I walked from my campsite to the clearing where the dancing and drumming would be in my regalia, my traditional Native American dress. When I got there, I saw my father talking to a man who was also in regalia, but I did not recognize him. The second he saw me approach, he started watching me in a way that weirded me out. I was instantly uncomfortable with the way he looked at me, but I was raised to see the best in people, so I ignored it. Within seconds of meeting me, he asked to tie these leather bracelets around my wrist. I got the impression that he asked me to do it instead of my father so that I would have to touch him, but I did it despite this feeling. As the morning went on, I felt him watching me everywhere I went. At one point, he came up to me and said he'd seen my picture from the year before and that he knew it was me from my dress, which was in fact unique, and my hair. Know that I'm adopted by a Native American family, and I have red hair and snow white skin, so I tend to make an impression at these gatherings based on how I look. He told me he came because he saw the picture. This gave a twisted feeling in my gut. He saw my picture the year before and came this year to see if I was here again? I was pretty innocent and naive back then, but this just screamed bad news to me. I started avoiding him as best as I could, but he went from watching me to following me over the next 2 days. It got to the point where I wouldn't even walk back to my camper alone, because he'd followed me there once already. Everywhere I turned, there he was. Following me turned into making me dance with him. There's a lot of dancing at these gatherings, and It's disrespectful to refuse, especially to your elders, so I complied. At the end of the day, I started to leave to go back to my campsite, and he stepped in front of me, grabbed my face, and pressed his forehead and nose to mine, like an intimate moment between a couple in love. I felt so disgusted being touched by him and held like that I missed the first part of what he said to me. I was too busy thinking about grabbing my decorative knife from my waist and stabbing him in one of those crazy eyes that told me exactly what he wanted. And if his eyes didn't already spell out the fact that he wanted me in a way no middle-aged man should ever want a 14-year-old girl, he practically told me. He said, "I'll be missing you tonight." And then he let go of me. I almost threw up right then from panic. Honestly, I don't remember why I didn't tell my parents that I thought he was gonna try to rape me, because I did think that, I was certain. But with my family, I thought I would be safe. They knew something was up though, because that night, they asked if the man had tried to hurt me. I said no because it was true. But I didn't go to sleep that night. Terror and panic kept me awake. That and the feeling I was being watched. I felt like the man was right outside the camper. It was my intuition keeping me awake. I just knew that if I closed my eyes, something bad would happen. I kept thinking I heard sounds at the window and by the door. I told myself it was my fear making me imagine things. And then I heard the jiggle of the lock being picked. I knew this was real. This was not in my head. The soft pop of the lock giving way and a small breeze from outside told me that this was actually happening. My panic choked me so much that would have been a blood-curdling scream for my mom was a strangled cry. I told her that he was here, that he popped the lock. She tried to ignore me in favor of sleep and said it was a dream. But my terror alarmed her, and she went to the door. Sure enough, the door was open, swinging in the breeze. The man long gone because of my immediate scream for help. My mom told my dad what happened, and we relocked the door, but I don't think anyone slept. The next morning, no one talked about it. And the man was nowhere to be seen. No police were called, which was shocking to me because my dad was an ex-army guy and a current cop. If anyone would have followed up on this guy, it was him. I often wondered if he and my older brothers had taken matters into their own hands. Everybody knew about it, but nothing was ever said. Ever. It has been 7 years and it's never been brought up. I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't had that gut feeling that kept me awake. We were all heavy sleepers. I never would have heard the lock being picked. I always wonder what his plan was after getting into the camper. He couldn't get to just me without having to deal with my family first. My boyfriend thinks that the only thing a guy that determined could have done at that point was to kill us in our sleep and then do what he wanted to do with me. A dark part of me hopes that my dad and brothers did do something about it, and that the sick bastard is at the bottom of that lake, but they are good people and would never do that. He's caused me years of lasting trauma and terror that I cannot escape, and to this day, I obsessively check locks before going to bed. I avoid looking out the peephole, terrified of what I'll see on the other side of the door waiting for me. I've gone so far as to check the closets when I'm in my apartment alone. I don't know what I expect to find, but I always have to check for him anyways. It's been 7 years, and because I never knew what happened after that night, I still fear him. He waited a whole year to find me at that powwow, obsessively stalked me for 2 days, and then disappeared. So to my stalker, potential rapist, and maybe murderer, if you aren't rotting away at the bottom of the lake and You're still out there. Let's not meet.